Summoning a ton of monsters is integral to most decks' game plans. As a result, turning off the ability for your opponent to perform those summons is incredibly disruptive. Even restricting the number of summons your opponent performs can still be enough to change the direction of a game, leading to many cards with this exact effect to have a splash in competitive. And starting us off at number 10, we have Zap Mustung. This is a level 4 light thunder monster that cannot be normal summoned or set, and must be special summoned during your main phase 1, but cannot be special summoned if you special summoned other monsters during this turn. Up to twice per turn, this card can't be destroyed by battle. Finally, each player can only special summon a number of times equal to the number of attacks they performed during their turn. Mustung has an incredibly powerful effect that can completely ruin your opponent's game plan. However, its restrictions are very difficult to work around. There aren't a ton of cards that can just summon any monster you want from your hand, as most of them only summon specific types of monsters. There are ways to easily summon monsters from the graveyard, but that requires first putting Mustung into the graveyard in the first place. While there are cards that can do this, getting this to work at all requires having pretty specific cards available to you in your opening hand. And you do need to get these cards in your opening hand, as this lock becomes much weaker on later turns, once your opponent has already had the time to set up. If they already have a board full of boss monsters, not only can they likely find a way to answer Mustung, but they'll also be able to declare a few attacks, allowing them to special at least a few monsters. The real problem is just that there's no reason to play Mustung over any other Floodgate monsters. Cards like Pachycephalo and Inspector Boarder can just be normal summoned and disrupt your opponent just as much, if not more than Mustung does. The combination of not having the best restrictive ability around while also having far more guardrails than other Floodgate monsters has left Mustung without a real reason to be played. But the sheer power of its effect still can't be understated. Without these restrictions, Mustung would just be as annoying as these other monsters, terrorizing unsuspecting players on the Master Duel ladder. And at number 9, we have Narrow Pass. This is a continuous trap that can only be activated if each player controls 2 or less monsters. While this remains face-up on the field, players can only normal summon 2 additional monsters. This does continue over turns, so once you flip Narrow Pass, each player only gets to normal summon 2 more times before they are prevented from doing so ever again, at least while the card stays face-up on the field. Now, this is a card that has gotten a lot worse with time. While preventing your opponent from normal summoning on any future turns in the right scenario sounds insane, one normal summon is more than enough for most decks to win the game nowadays. Unless you're playing against Flunderees, this isn't likely to actually work. Of course, in the earlier days of the game, this was a lot more punishing. This is a double-edged sword though, however, as in the earlier days of the game when your opponent was more reliant on the normal summons, you were as well. Finding a way to win without summoning monsters often meant you had to rely on cards such as Wave Motion Cannon, which wasn't exactly reliable against the incredibly powerful back row removal available at the time. It was still possible to hide behind Floodgates like Gravity Bind and stall long enough for a win in some decks, but those decks still often wanted to normal summon some monsters of their own. The problem was instead that those Floodgates were often just more worth using than Narrow Pass itself was, as they would shut off all monsters the opponent had, rather than just stopping them from putting too many into play. The final nail in the coffin of this card's viability is the fact that it doesn't prevent players from normal setting monsters, which means the player could still, very slowly, build a board and overwhelm your defenses. Overall, Narrow Pass just wasn't impactful enough, or far too impactful into the player who activated it for it to see competitive play. And at number 8, we have A.I.Q. This is a continuous trap spell that you can only activate if you control an Ad Ignister monster. It has the effect where neither player can link summon more than once each turn. However, during your standby phase, you have to tribute a link monster to destroy this card. A.I.Q. is a card that can be very strong, but has a few restrictions that really hurt it. The Ignister strategy does have several non-link monsters in its arsenal, but the main goal of the deck is to summon a massive The Arrival Cyberse Ad Ignister. This is a Link 6 monster, which requires at least 3 monsters with different attributes to summon. It gains 1000 attack for each material used for its summon, it's unaffected by other card effects, and you can only control 1 Arrival Cyberse Ad Ignister. And once per turn, you can target a monster on the field and destroy it, then summon an Ignister token to the field. If you can make a large enough Arrival Cyberse, there's very little your opponent can do to win the game at that point. It's kind of have a kaiju or bust. With this in mind, A.I.Q's role in the strategy becomes more suspect. If you're going to try to end on one massive Link monster card, a card that forces you to tribute that monster to stay on the field becomes less attractive. While you could just let it go after one turn, at that point, was activating the card really that necessary? There are few situations where a large Arrival Cyberse wouldn't win the game, but an Arrival Cyberse and A.I.Q on the field would. In the end, the card becomes mostly unnecessary in the archetype it was built to work with, and seeing that you need to have one of these monsters on the field to even activate the card, that becomes a big handicap. On top of all this, there are decks that don't link summon particularly often anyway, so this card is only applicable in specific matchups. All in all, A.I.Q is a potentially powerful card that ended up simply being superfluous and awkward in the deck that could actually use it. And at number 7, we have Summon Gate. This is a continuous trap with the effect where players can't special summon more than 3 monsters from their extra deck each turn. Summon Gate is a card that's extremely disruptive against particular decks, while not that important against others. A deck like Raid Raptor goes into the extra deck several times a turn, but a deck like Dinosaurs or the aforementioned Flu don't specifically summon from the extra deck too often. On top of that, while many decks do have to go into the extra deck several times over the course of their combo, they can pivot their plays to play around Summon Gate. This has gotten even more true over time, as cards like Nightmare Phoenix that allow players to destroy Floodgates easily out of the extra deck have been printed over time. While this does limit the usefulness of Summon Gate quite a bit, it's still by no means a weak card, and that's thanks to one very simple ruling. Summon Gate doesn't just count summons from when it was face up on the field, but rather it tracks all summons that happened during a turn, regardless of if it's face up on the field or not at the time. This means that you can flip Summon Gate after your opponent has already summoned from their extra deck 3 times and prevent them from doing any further summons that turn, stopping them from accessing their Phoenixes or Little Knights or whatever other tech option they would use to get rid of the pesky Floodgate. This allows Summon Gate to win games on its own in the right scenario, though those scenarios are somewhat limited. Certain decks will go into the extra deck more or less as part of their combo, and how many times they do so will change how useful Summon Gate is specifically against them. The final result has been that Summon Gate hasn't quite found its way into many side decks, as it simply is a bit too unreliable despite how powerful it can be. And at number 6, we have Summon Breaker. This is a field spell with the effect where, during the first main phase, if the turn player summons 3 monsters, it immediately becomes end phase. Breaker is a card that punishes the opponent for attempting to develop their board in just about any way. Any type of summoning at all will be punished by Breaker, regardless of if it's from the extra deck or normal summons. No matter what you're doing, Breaker is going to punish you for it. It's even quite difficult to go into your extra deck and find a way to out Breaker. Summoning a Nightmare Phoenix won't work, as Phoenix would normally be your 3rd summon exactly, so Breaker would activate. All of this is well and good, but Summon Breaker has one flaw that stops it from being anywhere near as devastating as it should be: the fact that it only applies during the first main phase. Your opponent can simply go to their second main phase after performing 2 summons and then finish doing their combo there. This does make them forfeit their battle phase, so decks that would focus on performing OTKs would be quite hurt. But decks that are prepared to go first can kind of just do their thing after the battle phase. You can use this to punish your opponent quite harshly, as cards like Parthian Shot can just end their turn after the end of the battle phase, and this is a game-winning play. However, it's also a bit inconsistent, as it does require finding 2 cards, only one of which is particularly searchable. Summon Breaker is the kind of card that can be very back-breaking in the perfect situation, but has overall been slightly too gimmicky to really see much competitive play. And at number 5, we have Simul Archfiends. This is a normal trap of the effect where, this turn, neither player can special summon monsters with the same type, as in Synchro, Fusion Xyz, etc., as monsters they control. Also, if you don't control 2 or more monsters of the same type, your monsters gain 500 attack. This is a very annoying effect to try to play under. Many decks are focused on summoning monsters of a single extra deck type, meaning that this sort of restriction can be really devastating. Unfortunately, there is a bit of an elephant in the room we have to talk about. Dimension Barrier just completely outclasses this card for a number of reasons. The biggest one is that Barrier doesn't force you to wait for your opponent to summon a monster before its effect becomes active. As soon as you see a card like Noah Punk Zia Min, you know your opponent is going to be making some synchro monsters. However, with Simul Archfiends, you have to wait for them to actually summon their first synchro before you can do anything to stop them. However, with a Dimension Barrier, you can just name synchros as soon as you figure out what they're up to and shut down their combo entirely. With Archfiends, you have to wait for them to get to their first synchro, and then you can lock them out of further plays, which just sometimes isn't good enough. If the first monster they summon is a form of interruption, you'll be in a pretty rough spot. However, there is some good news for Simul Archfiends. For one, Dimension Barrier can't affect Link monsters, so against Link decks, Archfiends is better. Dimensional Barrier is also banned, so Archfiends has that going for it too. The card may be outpaced, but that doesn't mean that the card is weak. Now that Barrier is banned from sideboards, we can only hope that duelists don't switch to Archfiends instead. And at number 4, we have Scary Moth. This is a level 6 wind insect with 1800 attack and 2300 defense. It has the effect for each player can only special summon once each turn. Similar to the last entry on this list, Moth is essentially a slightly worse version of another broken floodgate that already exists, namely Vanity's Fiend. This monster stops both players from ever special summoning. However, it itself cannot be special summoned. This restriction does not appear on Scary Moth, meaning there is a meaningful trade-off between the two cards. Vanity's Fiend has beat out Scary Moth in many lists, though, as it's much more powerful if you're simply planning to normal summon the monster. Any deck that can begin its combo without using its normal summon could, theoretically, do their combo and then tribute summon Vanity's Fiend to stop the opponent from doing anything. As a result, the card has popped up in various side decks over the years, though it's never exactly been a consistent option. Moth is a lot worse in this role, as not only can it be attacked over, it also has far less attack points than Fiend does. While this doesn't matter that much nowadays, historically this meant that plenty of normal summons could out Moth by battle, allowing them to perform a combo in their second main phase. However, if you special summon Scary Moth, it becomes a lot better. There are plenty of ways to do this too, such as using the pendulum mechanic, but they all require a good amount of setup. In the grand scheme of things, finding a way to tribute summon out Fiend has come up slightly more often than Scary Moth getting cheated out to play has, so it's been the more successful card. Still, that doesn't take away from how frightening this insect really is. And at number 3, we have Blue Eyes Spirit Dragon. This is a level 9 dragon synchro with one tuner and one or more non-tuner Blue Eyes monsters as its materials. It has the effect where neither player can special summon 2 or more monsters at the same time. Once per turn, if a player activates the effect of a card in the graveyard, you can negate that effect. You can also tribute this monster to special summon a light dragon synchro monster from your extra deck in defense position, but you have to destroy it at the end of the turn. Spirit Dragon was part of one of the many waves of Blue Eye support, though this wave was notable for actually letting the deck be meta for a short time. In fact, thanks to the meta of the time, Spirit Dragon actually helped the deck win Worlds that year. The metagame going into Worlds played very poorly into exactly Spirit Dragon. Some of the best decks included Phantom Knights, Burning Abyss, and Magispector. Phantom Knights and Burning Abyss are both graveyard-focused decks, who both got shut down pretty hard by the Graveyard Negate. Any Pendulum deck also got shut down hard by Spirit Dragon's effect that prevented summoning multiple monsters at once, making the mechanics so central to Pendulum monsters far less effective. The ability to tag into certain synchro monsters is extremely powerful as well. Targets such as Azure Eye Silver Dragon and Stardust Spark Dragon both have effects that can prevent their own destruction, letting you keep them around as well as use their effects to protect your other monsters. The only problem with Spirit Dragon is that it has fallen off over the years as Blue Eyes waned in relevance. Still, the card is good in Blue Eyes decks, even if the Floodgate effect specifically hasn't been as good more recently. And at number 2, we have Shaddol Winda. This is a level 5 Dark Fusion spellcaster with 2200 attack and 800 defense. It must first be fusion summoned and can be made with the Shadow monster and any dark monster. It has the effect where it can't be destroyed by your opponent's card effects, and if it's in your graveyard, you can target a spell or trap card in your grave and add it to your hand. However, most important of all, each player can only special summon one monster each turn while this card is face up on the field. Wanda is the most aggravating card in the Shaddol archetype, and one of the most annoying fusion monsters Konami has ever printed. It can be dealt with in a few ways, with a simple Book of Moon being enough to get around the card, but it's the perfect amount of easily accessible and game-winning to become terrifying. The card is very similar to Scary Moth, but whereas finding a way to get Scary Moth into play is a bit of a challenge, the Shaddol archetype is all about making powerful fusion monsters easily. Their fusion spell, aptly named Shaddol Fusion, is the prototype for the busted fusion spells like Branded Fusion that don't even need you to find the fusion material before you activate them. This makes getting to Winda very practical, unlike many of the other setups we've mentioned so far in this list. And the protection means that your opponent can't rely on a lot of the removal against Winda. The thing that makes Winda and the last spot on this list, Spirit Dragon, so much better than the rest of the cards in this list are that they are just one part of a larger, powerful strategy that can play a full game of Yu-Gi-Oh! Rather than a simple combo that has to hope your opponent can't play through them. The setups we mentioned earlier with things like Summon Breaker and Parthian Shot are very all-in, as they require multiple cards to work, and those cards don't do anything besides their singular effect. However, all of the cards in the Shaddol archetype have a variety of powerful effects, including Winda, who adds back another card from your grave to your hand when she goes to the grave. This, in tandem with the rest of the Shaddol monsters, means that getting around Winda isn't the end of the game on its own, as the Shaddol player didn't put so many resources into their Floodgate that the game would become unwinnable for them after. Still, despite this immense power terrorizing players for years, there's still one specific Floodgate that meets these requirements that's still more powerful. And all the way at number 1, we have Summon Limit. This is a continuous trap with the effect where neither player can summon more than 2 monsters each turn. Summon Limit is the most broken version of this effect we've ever seen so far, for a couple of pretty innocuous reasons. For one, it's a continuous trap, giving it the same jump scare tech that A.I.Q and Summon Gate have. This is most potent with Summon Limit thanks to how all-encompassing and how low its requirements are. Summoning any kind twice in one turn is something that decks have been doing regularly for years now, so preventing any additional summoning is backbreaking. On top of that, it's very easy to activate, with no requirements for using the card besides drawing it. This not only means that it's easy to use once you do draw the card, but it also means you don't have to warp your deck around it at all, which is very important. A card like Scary Moth or Zap Mustung that, in a vacuum, have powerful effects and aren't impossible to get into play, are much worse in practice simply because they require building your deck around them to even work. Unlike the last 2 spots on this list, this card is powerful not because it's part of a strong strategy, but because it can be put into already powerful decks without compromising their strategies at all. Decks like Snake Eyes would play this card when going first, flip on your opponent's turn to force them to play through it, and then send it to the graveyard with their Snake Eye effects not to have to deal with the Floodgate on their own turn. This was devastating, as dealing with one of the best decks in the game while also not having access to your actual engine was essentially an unwinnable game state. This was made even worse by the fact that you had no idea if your opponent's set card was Summon Limit or an Infinite Impermanence until it was already too late. Summon Limit was so difficult to deal with that it quickly got abandoned in the TCG once it rose to prominence. A feat not shared by any cards we've talked about today. It's inarguably the most powerful Floodgate of this kind, easily snagging the top spot on today's list.